They said she was too strange to belong. A 13-year-old girl who barely spoke, who felt more at home with animals than people. But in a forgotten town where even legends fade, she stepped into the corral with the most dangerous wild Mustang in Wyoming. No whip, no saddle, just a wooden flute, and a silence that stopped time. The stallion, untouched, unbroken, walked to her like he'd been waiting his whole life, and that moment changed everything. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The banners at the Jackson Hollow Reboot Festival flapped violently in the mountain wind. Their once proud reds and blues faded by the sun. Dust kicked up from the rodeo arena and settled in fine lines across folding chairs and faded denim. The town hadn't held an event this size in years. People came for the funnel cakes and the nostalgia, but they stayed for the rumor, the one about the wild stallion and the man bold enough to bet his fortune on taming it. Grant Mortimer stood tall in the center ring, perfectly still, despite the gale that tugged at his black tailored coat. 62, with piercing gray eyes and silver hair slicked into precise lines, Grant looked less like a rancher and more like a CEO stranded in cowboy boots. And that's exactly what he was. He made billions in tech, then bought half of Jackson Hollow for the sake of legacy. Now legacy had teeth. Behind him, encased in a reinforced steel corral, stood Shadowflame, a pure black Mustang stallion with a jagged white blaze down his face. Shadowflame looked more storm than horse. His flanks twitched. His eyes, wild and yellow bright, rolled against the sunlight. He reared violently, slamming hooves against the corral railings. The noise echoed like thunder. Grant's voice cut through the wind. $1 million, he announced calmly, his voice amplified by a discreet mic on his lapel. To anyone who can earn the trust of Shadowflame within 5 minutes. Not break him, not beat him, simply calm him. But fail and you owe me 10,000, the crowd murmured. Some gasped, others laughed uneasily. 3 professional trainers had already tried and failed. One had a shattered collarbone, another broken ribs. The third retired. From the front row, Clara Monroe stared, transfixed. Clara was 13, slender with unruly dark curls, barely tamed by a tattered ribbon. Her amber eyes held the kind of depth most people avoided, not because they were empty, but because they were too full. Clara didn't speak much. When she did, it was usually to animals. She stood beside her grandmother, Ruby Monroe, a weathered woman in her early 70s, with a spine of iron and hands calloused from decades of ranching. Ruby wore a threadbare canvas jacket, boots older than some pickup trucks, and a permanent frown etched deep by Wyoming winters and hard decisions. "Don't look at that horse," Clara, Ruby muttered. "He's not a creature, he's a spectacle now." But Clara wasn't listening. Her breath had caught in her throat. Something in Shadowflame's eyes spoke to something deep and buried inside her. Not wildness, not rage. It was despair. "It's scared," she said, voice low. Ruby blinked at her, startled. Clara's mind pulled her backward through time. 5 years ago, in this very arena, her mother had stood beside a similar stallion, one no one else could touch. Emma Monroe. The town still whispered her name, a gifted horsewoman with a reputation for taming the untamable, until her truck went over Dead Man's Ridge after a meeting with Mortimer. The official word was mechanical failure. Ruby never believed it, neither did Clara, especially not when she saw Grant Mortimer standing like a king beside Shadowflame, smiling like he'd just opened the gates to a coliseum. A man stepped into the ring, tall and wiry with a coiled rope and the confident swagger of a rodeo veteran. "Name's Rick Tanner," he called out. "Let's see if this stallion can dance." He didn't last 2 minutes. Shadowflame backed into the far corner, then without warning, lunged. Rick barely escaped stumbling from the ring as the crowd gasped and applauded simultaneously. Clara's fists clenched around the hem of her sleeve. Her heart pounded. Her feet wanted to move. She didn't understand it, not entirely, but she knew. She knew she had to go in there. "Grandma," she whispered. "No," Ruby said flatly, not even looking at her. "But I can." "No, Clara." Ruby turned her voice iron. "This ain't for children. That horse would snap you like a stick." Clara looked back toward the corral. Shadow Flame was still pacing, neck-arched, ears pinned flat. But when their eyes met again, just for a heartbeat, he stilled. Like he recognized her. Like he'd seen her before. Clara remembered last summer, helping Dr. Calloway check on a sick calf up near Black Ridge. A black stallion had watched them from the crest of the hill, silhouetted by thunderclouds. She remembered the glint of that white blaze. It was him. Shadow Flame. "Next, brave soul." Grant's voice rang out again. "Or shall we call it a day?" Something in the crowd shifted. A ripple of curiosity, then surprise. Because Clara Monroe stepped forward. She wore jeans 2 inches too short and boots scuffed to the soles. Her coat was unbuttoned and her curls whipped in the wind. She looked like someone who had no business being there, and yet no one moved to stop her. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly to the ring manager. "I'd like to try." Grant chuckled, then paused. "What's this?" "The spirit of the West reborn." He looked at Ruby, then recognition bloomed. Emma's girl. Ruby pushed through the crowd. "She's not doing this. She's just a child." Clara looked up at her grandmother. "Please, just 5 minutes." Grant Mortimer's smile widened. "Let her." "I'm curious what the girl inherited." "You lay one finger on her. I won't have to." Clara turned to face the gate. Shadow Flame was watching her now. Head lowered, muscles taut. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden flute carved by her mother when she was 7. And as the gate creaked open, she whispered under her breath onto the crowd, not to Grant, not even to her grandmother. "To the horse! I remember you," and stepped inside. The wind at Jackson Hollow shifted the moment Clara stepped into the corral. It wasn't just the physical breeze whipping across the open field, but something subtler, an invisible hush, like the land itself had paused to listen. The crowd of townsfolk pressed tighter to the rails, unsure whether they were about to witness a miracle or a disaster. Shadow Flame stood on the far side of the arena, his powerful body coiled with tension, black coat glinting like polished coal under the pale afternoon sun, his ears flattened hooves pawing at the dirt. He was angry, terrified, ready to explode. Clara didn't flinch. She moved slowly, deliberately, boots crunching across the gravel. In one hand, she held her mother's wooden flute. In the other, a single carrot still dusty from the Monroe garden. She stopped near the center, careful not to step too close too soon. Then, as the crowd held its breath, she lowered herself cross-legged onto the earth. No rope, no reins, no saddle, only breath and silence. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice whispered, "What is she doing?" "She's waiting," answered an older woman, her eyes narrowed, recognizing the calm. Clara lifted the flute to her lips. The first note wavered in the wind, soft, unsure. Then came another. A lullaby. Nothing fancy, no performance flair. Just a melody played low and slow, like the heartbeat of someone remembering. It was the song her mother Emma used to hum in the barn late at night, when Clara was small and afraid of thunderstorms. The same melody Emma used when working with nervous foals and skittish rescues. Shadow Flame froze. His ears twitched. His pacing slowed. In the crowd, Ruby Monroe gripped the railing tighter. Her eyes were locked on her granddaughter, her lips silently moving in time with the notes. She remembered the song, remembered the way Emma had once tamed a blind quarter horse with nothing but that tune and the softness in her voice. Near Ruby stood Elijah Dunn, a wiry man in his 70s, with a leather hat and a permanent squint from too many years under the Wyoming sun. He leaned on a walking stick, his boots dusty from the canyonlands. Once a close friend of Emma's, he was known for his quiet wisdom and uncanny ability to read both weather and livestock. "That girl," Elijah murmured to no one in particular. "She's got it. The whole gift. Same calm. Same soul." The whispers around the arena began to stir stories, unraveling legends retold. A girl, not quite woman, holding the wildest horse in the valley, still with nothing but breath and sound. Shadowflame exhaled sharply, a puff of steam in the cool autumn air. His head tilted, his muscles uncoiled just slightly. Clara continued playing her fingers gentle on the flute, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't try to pull him closer, didn't demand his attention. She simply offered it. After 2 minutes, the stallion took a step forward. A ripple of awe rolled through the crowd. Clara paused, lowering the flute. Slowly, she placed the carrot on the ground beside her, then folded her hands in her lap. Shadowflame hesitated, then moved again. Each step was deliberate, cautious. But there was no panic in his gait now, no threat. He reached the carrot, sniffed it, then flicked it aside with his nose, not hungry, not yet. Clara didn't react. Instead, she whispered. Only a few near the front heard her voice, but those who did said it was more like a memory than a sentence. "It's okay, I see you." The stallion lowered his head. One final step. Then, silence. And in that silence, he touched her hand. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic. It was sacred. A velvet muzzle brushed gently against Clara's small, outstretched palm. The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't cheer. They stopped. Breathing, blinking, existing, frozen in reverence for a connection deeper than logic. At the edge of the arena, Sheriff Nolan Griggs stepped closer. A barrel-chested man with a lined face and a graying mustache, he'd seen more standoffs than he could count. But none like this. "Time," he said softly, just loud enough for Grant Mortimer to hear. Grant stood by the judge's booth, arms crossed, jaw tight. His smirk had faded sometime after the first flute note. Now he simply watched. Calculating, fuming beneath a polished expression. "She didn't bridle him," Grant muttered. Sheriff Griggs turned to him. "You said tame him." Semantics, Grant snapped. Eyewitnesses saw him approach, willingly make contact. Unprovoked. "I'd say she more than met your conditions." Reporters and cameramen surrounded the ring, now capturing every angle. A young journalist from the Wyoming Gazette adjusted her mic, eyes wide with disbelief. The girl who calmed the ghost horse with a song she whispered into her mic. No one saw it coming. Elijah Dunn turned to Ruby. "They'll be telling this one for 50 years. Ruby didn't reply. She only watched Clara stroke the stallion's mane, tears glistening in her tired eyes. The spell broke slowly. Clara rose to her feet, never startling the animal. Shadowflame stayed beside her, as if the 5-minute clock had never started or ended. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, and somewhere in that dusty little town, a new name was born. They called her the Mustang Whisperer. Autumn deepened its hold on Jackson Hollow, painting the pastures in copper and gold. The air was crisp and dry, and at the Monroe Ranch each morning began with a low mist curling off the grass like breath from sleeping giants. For Clara, the days after her connection with Shadowflame had passed in quiet wonder. The stallion, once feared as untamable, now trotted alongside her with gentle curiosity. He would nudge her pockets for carrots, snort in playful protest when she delayed their training, and listen, always listen, when she spoke softly about her dreams. They trained every day in the paddock behind the house, preparing for the fall harvest fair, where Clara planned to demonstrate her mother's legacy, what Emma Monroe had once called partnership horsemanship. Clara had studied Emma's journals late into the night under a worn quilt by oil lamp, tracing her mother's words like sacred scripture. One entry had been starred and underlined in bold pencil. A wild horse is not a soldier to command, but a partner to understand. Shadowflame responded to voice gesture breath. No whips, no bridles, just rhythm, respect, and space, and love. Clara believed it with all her soul. But love, as she was about to learn, was not always enough. On the seventh night, under a sky thick with stars, everything changed. It was Ruby Monroe who noticed first. She had risen before dawn, as always, to put on coffee and start the day. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon toast and wood smoke. She looked out the window, expecting to see Shadowflame waiting by the gate. But the paddock was empty. She frowned, pulled on her cardigan, and stepped outside. The gate was swinging open. The lock cut. Ruby's heart stopped. "No," she whispered. "No, Clara." Clara jolted awake to her grandmother's voice, the urgency slicing through sleep like a siren. She bolted from bed, feet bare on the wooden floor. "Shadowflame's gone," Ruby gasped, pointing with trembling hands. "The gate, there's tracks. Oh Lord, someone took him." Clara ran. She didn't hesitate to grab her boots, didn't stop to brush her hair. She sprinted to the paddock. Her chest tightened at the sight, hoof prints scattered in panicked tire marks, curving through the soft earth bits of broken fencing where the stallion had likely resisted. And near the gate, a flash of red, her harmonica crushed. "No," she breathed, voice cracking. "No, no!" She felt it then, not just fear, but loss, hollow and immediate. The connection, the invisible thread that had stretched between her and Shadowflame for days, had thinned. But it wasn't broken. "He's not gone," she said out loud. "I can still feel him. He's scared. But he's alive." Ruby, pale as snow, collapsed onto the porch steps, whispering Emma's name. The sheriff was called, neighbors rallied, and soon the ranch was filled with the low rumble of concern. But no one had answers, except Clara. She paced inside her mother's study, flipping through Emma's old maps and scribbled field notes. She found the page marked Thunder Ridge Herds, with arrows pointing to seasonal watering holes and canyons used as shelter. Clara's finger stopped at one circle, Ravine Hollow, known for returners. "He's headed home," she whispered, "where he was born." That afternoon, she gathered a team. Dr. Meg Calloway was the first to show up. A no-nonsense woman in her late 40s with steel gray hair tucked under a baseball cap, she was the town's senior veterinarian. Her jeans were always stained, her hands always busy, and her voice when not speaking to animals was soft but firm. "I believe you," Clara Meg said, adjusting her bag of supplies. "You've got the same intuition your mother had. Emma once led me to a wounded foal across 2 counties just by reading wind and hoof prints. Let's go." Also joining was Finn Harlow, a soft-spoken farmhand from the next valley. 19, lanky, with a mop of chestnut hair and a dog named Scout always at his heels, Finn had once worked under Clara's father. He didn't talk much, but he moved through nature like he belonged there. "I'll take the high ridge," he said, already scanning the sky for signs of storm. The last to arrive was Deputy Tilda Reyes, short, sharp-eyed, and skeptical. She was new to Jackson Hollow, moved from Boise after a failed city career. Her uniform was pressed, her notepad always ready. "I'm not saying I believe in horse telepathy," Tilda said, crossing her arms. "But I've seen too many stolen animals disappear for good. So if this kid's got a lead, I'll follow it. Just don't make me chase anything uphill." As the search party set out, Clara tucked her mother's journal into her backpack and placed the repaired harmonica around her neck. They climbed the foothills under a sky that darkened too quickly, the kind of dusk that whispered trouble. Thunder Ridge wasn't just a name, it was a place where lightning storms loved to nest. By the time they reached the upper trails, Scout was barking at unseen movement in the pines. Finn crouched by a patch of disturbed grass. "Hoofprints," he said. "2 sets. One heavier." "Drag marks." Meg knelt beside him. He resisted, probably spooked. Someone tried to load him, but he got free. He ran, Clara whispered, heart pounding. He ran toward the canyon. They followed the prints into thicker woods, their flashlights slicing the deepening dark. At one point, a distant whinny echoed through the trees. Clara turned her head sharply, eyes wide. That was him. "You sure?" Tilda asked, flicking her light around. "Yes." Clara broke into a run. "He's calling back." The trail narrowed, winding down into Ravine Hollow, and suddenly there he was, Shadowflame trembling, standing between 2 boulders, his sides heaving, one leg nicked and bleeding. He looked up. His eyes met Clara's. The bond snapped back like a thread drawn tight. She dropped to her knees, whispering the lullaby. Meg approached, slowly, hands open. Finn kept Scout calm with a firm whisper. Together they calmed him. Together they brought him home. The wind at the top of Thunder Ridge carried secrets, cool and sharp. It whispered through the pines, stirring the grass, with a restlessness that felt ancient. Clara Monroe stood at the highest point of the trail, her breath visible in the cold twilight air, and brought the flute to her lips. It was a simple wooden thing, worn smooth by years of use, her mother's, once now hers. The melody she played was older than words, a lullaby meant not for people but for the wild ones who listened with more than ears. She stood alone, small and resolute. Her curly hair tousled by the wind cheeks, flushed from the climb. Below her a canyon spread wide like an open palm. She didn't need to call for him. He would come. And he did. From the tree line emerged a dark silhouette, first one, then many. A herd of mustangs moved like water over stone, their hooves silent on the moss and dirt. Leading them was Shadowflame, his black coat shining like obsidian in the setting sun, the white streak down his face catching the final light like a banner. He stepped ahead of the herd, eyes locked on Clara. There was no fear now, only recognition. He walked to her without hesitation, each step deliberate, ears pricked forward. When he reached her, Clara lowered the flute. Shadowflame exhaled warm breath mixing with the rising mist. "You came back to me," she whispered, placing her hand on his neck. He leaned in, not like a tamed horse, but like a friend returning from war. Dr. Meg Calloway, watching from the tree line below with Finn Harlow and Deputy Tilda Reyes, let out a slow breath. "I don't care what anyone says," she murmured. "That girl's got magic in her bones." Finn seated beside his dog. Scout gave a rare smile. They belonged to each other. Deputy Reyes only nodded, her skeptical edges softened by the sight. "Let's get them home." But home wouldn't come so easy. As the group gathered to descend the ridge, the distant growl of engines split the silence. Clara tensed her hand, tightening on Shadowflame's mane. From the eastern slope, ADVs burst through the scrub, 3 of them black, fast, their drivers masked by bandanas and goggles. The tires tore through the underbrush, like claws throwing dirt and sparks. "It's them," Finn shouted. "Go, go." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She vaulted onto Shadowflame's back in one fluid motion, bareback and bridleless. The stallion flinched at first, unused to her weight and motion, but then settled. He understood. The connection between them flared bright. Clara leaned forward, whispered to him, and he moved. They shot down the side of the ridge, taking the deer trails, and washed out gullies that no motor could follow. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, trusting his instincts. The world blurred. Trees bent out of their way, branches snapped past her ears. Behind them, the roar of engines grew fainter, swallowed by the canyon's twisting throat. Meanwhile, the rest of the group had scattered into cover. Meg and Tilda took to the left trail, diving into a thicket, while Finn and Scout scrambled behind a boulder near the creek. From the higher road, headlights suddenly blinked, then a horn. A heavy-duty truck pulled into view. It was an old Ford with rust along the bumper but power in its stride. The man who stepped out had a barrel-chest silver beard and a glint in his eyes that said, "I've been fighting bad men longer than you've been breathing." Victor Shaw, age 62, owned the Shaw Ranch 2 valleys over. Known as a radical conservationist and thorn in Grant Mortimer's side, Victor had broad shoulders, work-worn hands, and a deep hatred for corruption masked as progress. He'd once sued Mortimer for illegal fencing on Mustang territory and won. "What in God's name are they doing on Thunder Ridge?" he asked. Seeing the masked riders in the distance, Tilda flashed her badge. Grant's men, trying to take back a horse that doesn't belong to him. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Like hell they will." He opened the tailgate and motioned Meg and Tilda inside. "Hop in. I'll intercept. You point me toward the trouble." Meanwhile, deeper in the canyon, Clara and Shadowflame ran like wind and shadow. She guided him with whispers and pressure from her knees, drawing on everything her mother had taught. The narrow ravine opened into a flat stretch of dry creek bed, and Clara slowed him down. She could hear no engines now, just the heartbeat of the land and her own. "We made it," she whispered. Shadowflame's ears flicked, catching something she couldn't. Clara turned. Behind them, a single ATV crested the ridge, still chasing. Clara gritted her teeth. One more boy. Before the ATV could descend, headlights blinded it from the left. A truck. Victor's. He roared onto the trail tires, spinning and blocked the rider's path. Meg and Tilda jumped out. The masked man swerved, panicked, and drove off into the brush, crashing into low branches as he fled. Victor spat into the dirt. Cowards. Moments later, Clara emerged from the lower trail, riding bareback with Shadowflame. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wild with adrenaline. She slid off his back and ran to the group. "He's okay," she panted. "He's safe." Victor looked at her long and hard, then gave a single approving nod. "You ride like you were born in the saddle, girl. That horse isn't just tamed, he's yours." Clara smiled, breathless. "We found each other." Victor stepped forward, extending a thick, calloused hand. "Victor Shaw. Heard about you. Didn't believe the stories. Now I do." She shook his hand. "Clara Monroe. You ever need a place to train protection, whatever? The Shaw Ranch is open. We've got space land and no patience for Mortimer's goons." Clara looked at Shadowflame, then back at Victor. "Actually, I want to plan something. A real demonstration, not just a fair show. Something big, something that tells people the truth." Victor's grin was wolfish. "Good. Let's give them a reason to listen." The scent of kettle corn and pine mulch swirled in the crisp October air. Jackson Hollow's Fall Fair, once a sleepy gathering of cattle breeders and pie contests, now buzzed like the heart of a small nation. Local news vans lined the edge of the fairgrounds. 2 regional television crews hoisted cameras over the grandstand lenses, pointed straight at the main arena, where the biggest event of the day was about to begin. And right in the center of that storm stood a girl with amber eyes and a stallion once called untamable. Clara Monroe, now 13, wore a faded chambray shirt that had belonged to her mother. Her curly hair was braided back, and her boots, though scuffed, stood firm in the dirt of the arena. Beside her stood Shadowflame, a black Mustang with a white blaze like a comet strike across his face. His body was powerful, yet still an odd calm that defied his wild history. From the announcer's booth, a voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Clara Monroe and Shadowflame." The crowd, packed shoulder to shoulder in the bleachers, erupted in anticipation. Some had come out of curiosity, others to mock the idea of whisper training. But when Clara walked to the center of the arena and removed Shadowflame's halter, leaving him completely free, silence fell. She didn't hold a whip. She didn't carry a rope. What she carried was a song. Clara stepped back and began to hum. her voice clear but low echoed against the wood beams and open sky. It was a lullaby passed down from her mother, a song first sung to wild foals at dusk. The melody hung in the air like fog. Shadowflame's ears flicked forward. His muscles relaxed. Then slowly, as if guided by invisible wind, the stallion began to move. He circled her, paused, lowered his head. Clara lifted a hand, and he turned in perfect rhythm. She stepped sideways, and he mirrored her like a shadow, spinning, stepping, pivoting. At one point, she knelt to the ground and whistled a soft three-note phrase. Shadowflame responded by lowering himself to his knees, then rolling gently onto his side, not in submission, but in trust. The audience gasped. Watching from the sidelines, Victor Shaw, arms crossed, an expression grim, leaned toward Dr. Meg Calloway, who stood nervously biting her lip. That girl just rewrote the book. Beside them stood Mayor Estelle Givens, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s, with a keen political nose and a silk scarf that never fluttered without intent. "Or burned it," she muttered. "Mortimer's going to hate this." And right on cue, the opposing gate opened. Grant Mortimer entered the arena wearing a gray suit, tailored within an inch of its life boots, polished, and spurs unnecessary. His white hair was slicked back. Behind him were two professional trainers and a dark Mustang nearly identical to Shadowflame, except for a jagged scar across its shoulder. The announcer's voice returned a bit more formal this time. Now a demonstration of traditional breaking methods by Grant Mortimer and his team. Mortimer raised a microphone. "Folks, what you just saw was charming. But in the real world, ranchers need horses that obey. That's what we're here to show." Clara stood at the far end, unmoving eyes locked on the Mustang. Mortimer's team moved fast. Ropes, bridles, flank, straps. The Mustang thrashed, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. One trainer yanked hard, and the horse reared, screaming into the air. Clara flinched. "Stop it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Then Shadowflame screamed. It wasn't a sound of fear, but of protest. Clara looked up, just as he bolted forward. The crowd gasped. Mortimer stepped back. His trainers dropped the rope in shock. Shadowflame placed himself between the other horse and the men, his stance tall ears, forward hooves planted. The second Mustang froze, recognizing something in Shadowflame's presence. They touched noses. Shadowflame nickered, then circled him slowly, ears flicking in a gesture no human could mimic. The second horse calmed his breathing, slowing. Clara walked to them step by slow step and stood beside both Mustangs. Neither moved. She raised the microphone Mortimer had dropped. "They don't need fear to follow us," she said. "They need to be heard." The arena was silent. You don't have to break a spirit to earn its trust. You just have to listen long enough to understand its story. Behind her, both Mustangs stood with her unroped, unforced, unafraid. The crowd erupted. Standing ovation. Cheers, tears. Cameras flashing like lightning. Even Sheriff Luca Harmon, a stoic man with a steel jaw and a record of never clapping at anything, took off his hat and nodded solemnly. Mortimer stood still, face pale, fists clenched at his sides. Mayor Givens approached him quietly. "Well," she said, "there goes your ribbon cutting." By the time Clara exited the arena, news outlets were already publishing headlines. "Whisper Girl stuns ranch world." "Shadowflame chooses trust over tradition." "A child teaches grown men to listen." The board of Jackson Hollow's Education Council, inspired by the moment, approached Victor Shaw with an idea. "We want to give her a space," said Councilwoman Jeanette Parlow, a former teacher known for her practicality. "Somewhere she can share what she knows." Victor nodded. "I've got a barn that needs a purpose." Weeks later, the Clara Monroe Center for Natural Communication opened its doors on the edge of Thunder Ridge. With it came horses thought unreachable, children who struggled to speak, veterans with broken memories, all seeking a language without words. Shadowflame stood at the entrance, no longer the ghost of the wild, but the face of a future that listened. In our daily lives, we often rush to fix, to correct, to be heard. But how often do we truly listen? Whether it's to a child, a partner, a friend, or even ourselves, the quiet moments of trust can create the deepest bonds. What Clara showed us with a wild horse might be exactly what we all need with each other. If this story touched something in your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you. And if you want more stories like this, remember to subscribe to the channel. Every view, every click helps us keep sharing the wild, the gentle, and the deeply human. Thank you for listening.